Good afternoon, everybody. This is our daily update on the national COVID-19 situation. We've got 6,801 cases on the current numbers, an increase of 18 cases in the last 24 hours. So although we're keeping below our 20 cases a day, there are still new cases and there are still small outbreaks detected in Victoria and New South Wales. There's still some evidence of low-level community transmission, which is why we have been saying for some time we cannot get complacent, and although we are now seriously looking at what measures could be relaxed and making recommendations to the National Cabinet over the course of the coming week, as was announced on Friday, we are very cautious about the need to move slowly and to get the testing done. We've had a huge increase in testing. I think over 630,000 tests done now. Victoria's just done 9,000, I think, yesterday, and that perhaps has been why they've identified a small number of additional cases. So once we have really good, strong testing, as we've said on many occasions, that will make us much more confident about relaxing restrictions. The other very important precondition that we've talked about on many occasions is the app. 4.25 million Australians have now downloaded the app, and clearly we need to keep downloads and registrations increasing. We think there are about 16 million adults with smartphones. They're our target population. They're the people we want to get to download the app because they're the people that are likely to be contacts of cases, and we want as many of them as possible to download the app. We are seeing some interesting, a little bit of more movement in the community. The tracking apps that we're following, and I should clarify, of course, that when I said on Friday at the press conference with the PM that Google tracks you, Google only tracks you when you consent and when you sign up to do that with one of their apps. But that's very useful information for us, and we are following, and there's been a bit more movement around the community, and that's possibly what you'd expect with some states having relaxed some of those regulations that they put in place. But clearly over the next month or so, when we start to get back towards normal, we still have to be incredibly careful. This virus is still in our community. It's still with us. We are, as we've said on many occasions, in a much better position than just about any other country in the world. But we have to be very careful as we chart the next few months of returning our society to as much normality as we can safely do, whilst we at all times continue to practice those things that we will do forever, our hand hygiene and being careful, and obviously practicing good social distancing measures over coming months. So I'll stop there and take questions. Thank you.
Did you have an update on how many people were in hospital and how many people were in ICU at the moment?
Look, I haven't got that data with me. It's been very progressively falling. The last data I had on ventilated people was around 20, but I can't confirm that of today, sorry.
Can I ask a question on the community sport, Professor? So is it a prerequisite that you get to the 40% of 16 million adult phone users, about 6 million, before you're able to advise the National Cabinet that may be able to proceed, that the restrictions be eased there, or is that not a deal breaker? Is 4.25 million getting around the sort of number you want to see? And secondly, how might that occur? How might community sport come back? What sort of conditions?
So community sport is in the package of measures that we're preparing advice for National Cabinet on. As you know, on Friday National Cabinet approved a set of principles, and particularly we're impressed with the AIS framework for rebooting sport generally, but they wanted us to provide recommendations around starting community sport in line with those AIS recommendations, but as part of the overall package, because, as I've said on many occasions, what we start next Monday, which is National Cabinet's sort of current time frame, has to be a package that's cautious enough to not put at risk the good work we've done now. So community sport is in that mix, as are gathering sizes and a number of other things that National Cabinet will consider. In terms of the app, what we've always said is that the more people that download the app, the more confidence the National Cabinet will have about that one aspect of our preparedness that we're still a little bit anxious about, the capacity to really get on top of contacts as quickly as possible. So there is no magic number. The more we have signed up of those 16 million, the more confidence I'll be able to give National Cabinet that they can make a decision. But the more confidence they have, the more bold they might be.
Those AIS recommendations, the first couple of stages are predominantly appear to be basically you can go to a training with a small number of people but not have contacts you can't tackle, you can't even pass the ball with someone. But some of the other recommendations appear to be much more long-term, like not being able to use saliva to shine a cricket ball, for example.
Yes.
You've spoken often about some of the permanent changes you think will see in society as a result of this. Are some of those, I guess, less hygienic practices in sport something that could be gone for much longer?
I absolutely think that's right. I think in so many parts of our society, hygiene practices need to change, and that'll have even when the coronavirus is gone, that will have influences on influenza, colds, also gastro, all of those things. We, as a first world, very wealthy country, have probably become a bit relaxed about hygiene, and I think it's time that we focused on those things and have learnt from this measure. So I don't think saliva to shining cricket balls is a good thing at all.
Just following up, sorry if I may, one of the other things was, for example, in a large team like AFL, to keep the mids, forwards and back team members separated in an ongoing basis. Might that be something the AFL in particular is considering?
Look, you'd have to ask the AFL that. I'm not across the specifics of that.
Professor, in terms of what we're seeing at Newmarch House, is that situation obviously a cause for concern, but is it changing any of your thinking, or are you preparing new advice or looking into preparing new advice to Cabinet? Is there a need for intervention from the federal government, perhaps, with some of the unexpected things that we've seen there? Just like to get your thoughts on that situation.
So the Commonwealth has been working very closely with New South Wales Health. As always, the public health response is delivered by the local state and territory health authority, but the Commonwealth has an overarching responsibility in aged care. We've put significant resources into Newmarch House. We've put extra infection control practitioners in, but it's a partnership. It's a terrible tragedy. We've had two aged care facilities that have had very significant outbreaks. Fortunately, we've had a number of others where they've been very quickly controlled, and it's nobody's fault that once you have really widespread transmission in a facility, as happened at Newmarch, most of those infections occurred, from that initial infection. There have been some more recent ones in the last few days, and that's why there's a serious look at the infection control practices, and I know New South Wales Health and the facility managers are looking at whether they might take some additional steps to take some of the people off-site, but that's being worked through in partnership as it should be. In terms of our general advice about residential aged care, it remains the same, and it's reflected in that the voluntary code that the facilities are agreeing with the National Cabinet have agreed, and it's out for consultation at the moment, around making sure that we keep people safe and stop this virus getting in. The critical thing with residential aged care is to stop the virus getting in.
Professor, there are a lot of confused parents out there at the moment with school-aged children. What is the advice at a committee level for whether or not it's safe for people to send their kids to school?
Correct. So our advice has not changed. Our advice is that transmission between children in schools is not well established, and in fact there's increasing data that it is uncommon, particularly now data from Europe in the New South Wales Health study. We think that children are not high transmitters of this virus in the school environment. We have always said that there is a potential risk for adults in the staff room, adult interactions at school drop-off and pick-up and interacting with teachers. And so we've recommended a range of mitigations to make sure that those risks can be reduced. Nobody at HPPC has ever been of the view that it is a risk for children. We know that teachers have been concerned, and we have done everything that we think is necessary to mitigate that risk. So I do understand that part of the confusion has been that in some jurisdictions schools were closed and have been closed because of the general message of stay at home, and they didn't want a lot of people moving around the community. But there's no one on HPPC who believes that there is a risk to children sending them to school.
And yet the Victorian medical officer has suggested that stay-at-home learning continue, remote learning continue, except for essential services. So how does that work within the committee when you have differing points of view about the messaging? Do you just trump the other members of the committee? How are decisions made? Our
decisions are consensus, and the Victorian Chief Health Officer, with respect, has said publicly that he thinks schools are safe for children. He has expressed the view, as have the Victorian government, that with the epidemiology that they had in Victoria, they want to stop movement of people around the community. That's the basis for their decision. He has never disputed the evidence on the safety for children.
So, sorry, just to then just carry that through, for him then, in that jurisdiction, do you think that it is wise for them to potentially make the decision that's right for their community and the spread they had there? Is it okay for them to go a different way? I
think the National Cabinet has always recognised that jurisdictions will take measures above the national baseline, and I know that every jurisdiction is now, including Victoria, is looking at what they do with schools. I mean, I think the Victorian Chief Health Officer has already flagged publicly that they are looking to try to see how they can reopen schools in a way that will gain the confidence of their parents and teachers. So there are differences. There are other differences across the nation, but in general, they're at the margins. And schools, clearly, the National Cabinet has taken a consistent view that they want to get schools open for face-to-face learning as soon as possible, but bring with them the parents and the teachers who have still got residual anxiety.
On aged care, you've raised concerns that some of the elderly, particularly potentially patients with dementia, are not getting the care that they would because the visitation of family has been prevented. Would you like to see or be willing to commit to some kind of review looking at so-called extra deaths, effectively if there has been an increase in the number of deaths compared to normal, not including cases of coronavirus?
So I think we would all, the question relates to whether the visitation is a risk. Is that what you're saying?
If there's been higher than normal deaths within the aged care sector, not including those coronavirus cases.
Oh, I see. I get what you mean. I think that would be a difficult study to do, but let me consider that one, because I think there are obviously, unfortunately, a large number of deaths all the time in aged care, but my concern was not so much about the risk of death, but it was more the mental health risk. If you're someone who has dementia and you're at the end of life, and your only person that gives you any real succour and mental interaction is your family, we think that unless there's a really strong public health reason, we should allow visitations. But that's an interesting question to look at. Oh, there's someone else. You haven't had a go yet. No, sorry. Yeah.
Just on universities this morning, Dan Taylor flagged that he was interested in not only school campuses reopening, but also universities reopening in a more fulsome way. What kind of relationship does the HPPC had with the university sector, and how's that contributed? Sure.
So I think universities are clearly in the mix of things that we're talking about with National Cabinet during this week. And again, it is likely that they will start to recommence some activities without preempting the decisions of National Cabinet. But a lot of what universities have done have been of their own volition. We didn't ever say that universities should shut down, and we think that there are clearly things they can do online, but there are some things that they should be doing face-to-face. It's hard to run a research lab and do some sort of a small group teaching online, so it's likely that they will start cautiously, like everything else, to recommence some of that activity.
Professor, just on aged care again, is there anything that the AHPPC has seen? Are you investigating new protocols? Is there a need to reconsider that from what we've seen in recent days?
So I think there was a very significant review done of the Dorothy Henderson Lodge outbreak that we have seen, and I think the message about this virus in aged care is that if it gets in and is widely spread, it is a very, very difficult problem. It seems to, interestingly, some elderly residents get asymptomatic infections, but a lot of them get very severe infections. And clearly many of these people have advanced comorbidities and have been very unwell anyway. The clear message has been how difficult it is to control it when it's in there, and that we must do everything we can to keep it out. And probably the most important message that we keep saying is that nobody, no staff member, no contractor, no visitor should enter an aged care facility unless they are 100% well. If you have a sniffle, a tickle in your throat, a sore throat, do not go into an aged care facility. Go and get a coronavirus test. You can get it now, but stay away. You have to be perfectly well to walk in the door of an aged care facility. That is my message.
In that context then, Professor, at the Newmarch facility, is it best for those people to remain in that facility so the outbreak is contained? Because there's some people saying, why aren't they being sent to hospitals or other areas where they can be isolated? Would that just increase the risk of them spreading the virus more widely?
Well, I think wherever they're looked after, you should be able to manage infection control and properly. The main reason, my understanding, is that most residents have stayed there is that's where they want to be. And clearly if somebody can benefit from hospital treatment, as happened in Dorothy Henderson and has happened with some Newmarch residents, they are taken to hospital. But in the main, if people have expressed a strong view that they want to stay where they are, that's where they should be looked after. And our philosophy in New South Wales Health's philosophy has been to inreach all of those services that are necessary to make it work.
Professor, we have heard information this afternoon that a member of the New Zealand Warriors actually didn't travel to Tamworth with the rest, and he's going to get a COVID-19 test. He hasn't been diagnosed with anything, but does that information worry you? And do you think that all the members of the team should potentially get a test now while they're in quarantine so we can find out before they start playing if they might be at risk?
Well, the value of testing well people is not demonstrated. It only tells you whether you've got the virus at that one time. The most important thing is that they're quarantined for those 14 days. The risk, New Zealand has hardly any cases of the virus. I hadn't heard about this player being tested. I'd be very surprised if it's positive given what's happening in New Zealand at the moment. But the most important thing, and one that I would have insisted on with Border Force, is that they had a rigorous quarantine arrangement, because we're doing that for everyone who comes from any country at the moment. That's the important thing. If they're quarantined, clearly that if anyone in their team becomes unwell, they should be tested. But there's not a lot of value in testing well people, because you could be incubating the virus, it could appear in a few days' time. We don't know what that means. We just have one more question.
With regards to the changes that the AHPPC is considering that will go to the National Cabinet, could you speak to the timeline when you might expect a first stage? You mentioned Monday potentially, and would you be considering multiple stages at once that we could potentially have a longer term roadmap to give to Australians?
Again, that without preempting the decision for National Cabinet, clearly this has to be staged. So there will be a stage 1 and there will be a stage 2, and how many more stages after that is a decision for National Cabinet. But the lessons that we've learnt from overseas is that if you go too quickly and open up things too quickly, you can get a second wave. So our strategy will be to make some cautious, gentle steps in the first instance, to wait a period of time, and you need some weeks to see what the impact of those changes are And if things are good, and those conditions that we've set out in National Cabinet to monitor still are good, we'll go to another stage, we'll reevaluate, and further stages will depend on how things are going in the epidemiology. Okay, thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.